Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Matthew chapter 24, and we are looking at Jesus' explanation, his teaching on end times. And though it is not an exhaustive teaching, it gives us a very, I'm going to say, pointed insight into end times. Now, it's important to understand biblical prophecy as it is presented in the Old Testament, and then also in the New Testament, for the most part, that it centers around God's plan and purpose for the nation of Israel. But there are some misconceptions. And so, as Jesus is teaching, he starts off by, remember, answering the disciples' question. So let's bring up the scriptures. Debating, should I show this now? I'll come back to this. All right. Okay, let's go. All right. Now, all right. So let's go back to. Let me start reading at 29, verse 29. Excuse me. So he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun would be darkened and the moon would not shed its light. The stars would fall from the sky, and the celestial powers would be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from one end of the sky to the other. Jesus' focus here is on the prophetic fulfillment with Israel when he says he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and he will gather his elect from one end, forgot to do my thing here, from one end, from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Now, the term elect, and this is what I want to kind of deal with here and to show you that the term elect, he is referring to Israel. I'm going to show you that in a moment. And the reason why that's important to understand is to understand what is being transpired here. Now, let me also say this, that the term, he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect. Now, when will this happen? At the second coming. So in order to understand what will happen at the second coming of Jesus, the event. Now, let me also say this, that it's important that you pay attention to the prophecies, the details of prophecies. Okay? So, let's go back to verse 15. So, remember when he shifts his thought, and even here in verse 14 says, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So he's talking to his disciples. So then he shifts and says, so he shifts from the church the disciples would ultimately become the church. And then he says, so when you see the abomination that caused this desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. So now we covered that. Now, the prophecies that that Jesus is citing, Daniel says that this prophecy concerns Israel and the people of Israel, the Jews, and then the temple, okay, and Jerusalem. So now when he says immediately after the tribulation of those days, and then this is talking about the second coming, okay? So every eye will see Jesus when he returns. That's important. What this is not describing is the rapture. This is not describing the rapture of the church. I'll come back to that, but this is not describing the rapture of the church. Why? Because when you look at the description of the rapture of the church versus the second coming, you see the details. I'll come back to that, but let me go on, and I want to look at this description of the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky, and then all the people of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now watch that he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from one end of the sky to the other. Now, before I move on, there's a couple of things I want to point out here, and let's take a look at it. Oh, no, that's not what I want. All right, let's go to, no, wait a minute, no. My computer's running slow is what this is. All right, my computer's running slow. Here we go. All right, so again, I love the technology because here, in case some of you all know, let me show you this. I have an old school concordance. Let me show you. Had this thing for years. Okay, you can see how old it is. I got duct tape on it, but an old school concordance. All right. And this Bible tool, okay, has every word in the King James Bible. Okay, every word. I like this particular one. I have actually another one. It's up there. I have a modern version of it, and they take out what they may consider like maybe not essential words. But this one has every word in there. So that's a great Bible tool. However, I have it here online, and what I want to show you is the word elect. The word elect, okay, and where it is used in the Bible. Let's see if I can bring this up here. Here we go. I want y'all to be able to read it. So, okay. Okay. All right. So let's look at it this way. Okay. Let me go back. So in the Old Testament, look at the word. I want to look at Isaiah 45, and in verse 4. Okay. Okay. I think, can y'all read that? And then it says here, if you can read that. Okay. It says, for Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel my elect, I have even called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. Now, what I wanted to show you from this here. Well, you know what? Let me do this. I don't like the way this is looking here. Where is this at? Isaiah 45. Okay, let's do that. You can read this one a lot clearer. All right, let's go to Isaiah Isaiah 45. Okay. Yeah, you can read this one a lot clearer. Um, Now, let me see here. So I'm reading I should switch over to, I don't know. All right. So he says, for Jacob, my servant, let's look at it this way. Uh-huh. All right. Yes, here we go. Here we go. He says, for Jacob, my servant's sake, and Israel, my elect, I have called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. All right. So I want you to see that um, in this context here. Okay. So when Jesus here is referring to his elect, now even though in the New Testament, the church is referred to the elect because the word elect simply means chosen. My chosen one, the one who I've chose. So in this context here, remember he's been talking about prophecies concerning Israel. Okay, so when he says, verse 31, he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds. So his elect, his chosen ones. And in context, this is Israel. That's why I want to show you in the Old Testament, Israel was referred to as the elect. Plus, when you see the prophecy, what the details of the prophecies, especially the ones that Jesus specifically said, this is what Daniel the prophet wrote. Now look at verse 32 says, now learn this parable from the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprout leaves, you know summer is near. Now, before I move on, let me also say this. This understanding is going to be important for when we go further down and get into some of the parables that Jesus will talk about in regards to his coming. Just different words, different things that he's going to use. But okay, all right. So now learn this parable of the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender, it sprout leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near. At the door, I assure you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now, I want to kind of just address, there's a couple of things here. One, the parable of the fig tree, that there are some that say that this means Israel, that the parable was the fig tree was referring to Israel. And the reason why I say that is because in 1947, when Israel became a nation, then there were people who said, this is a fulfillment of prophecy. So now when you think about the nation of Israel today, then you think about when Jesus is talking about gathering his elect, understand the details. When does he gather the elect? Right? Look at verse 30 again. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all of the people of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds. So when is this gathering of the elect? At the second coming of Jesus, not before. And then what happens when Jesus comes? Well, let's back up. Immediately after the tribulation, Jesus comes. What happens during the tribulation? Let's back up. And then he says, so when you see the abomination that caused desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. This happens during the tribulation period. So then, Jesus, we have not seen to date this abomination that causes desolation. We haven't seen that, right? And we can get into the debate whether or not, as a believer, will you see it? In other words, they're talking about the rapture, right? But certainly, what happens as the events unfold, the abomination that causes desolation, the great tribulation, there'll be great tribulation that we haven't seen. And then he says, immediately after the tribulation, then he comes back. Immediately after the tribulation, he comes back. So now, when he talks about the parable of the fig tree, again, some people think that this is what this was referring or talking about Israel. Now look at this, verse 34. I assure you, this generation will certainly not pass until all these things take place. Now, here's the problem with some interpretations, that they say that in 1947, Israel became a nation. Now, I have questions, okay? I have questions about when you say that Israel became, that even fact that Israel became a nation. The fact, if you say that in what happened in 1947 was a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, that God was gathering his people together, right? That God was gathering his people together, and that this happened, this was a fulfillment in 1947. Well, let's back up some more. Let's back up some more. Look at chapter 23 and then verse 37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, she who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, yet you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. So my question is, did that happen in 1947? If God was gathering Israel, his elect, back into the land, well, first of all, did this happen? Now let's look at a couple other things too that let's look at a couple of other things. I think I want to go to let's go to Ezekiel. Let's go to Ezekiel. Let me try Ezekiel chapter 11. All right, watch this. Verse 17 says, therefore, this is what the Lord God says, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you from the countries where you have been scattered. And I will give you the land of Israel. Right? Again, that's a prophecy. Now, you remember in Acts 1, when the disciples asked Jesus, are you restoring the kingdom of Israel at this time? And then Jesus said, don't worry about that. You just go preach the gospel, right? Now watch this, verse 18. When they arrive there, they will remove all its detestable things and practices from it. And then he says, and I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them. I will remove their heart of stone from their bodies and give them a heart of flesh, so they may follow my statutes and keep my ordinances and practice them. And they will be my people, and I will be their God. So then in 1947, did that happen? So when you look at the current status of Israel, as I said, I have questions. For example, the people today, are they the physical descendants of Abraham? Now, I'm asking that sincerely. I don't know. We know especially in the Old Testament, and when it came to Jesus, remember his genealogy was cited. In fact, we have endless genealogies, right? We have genealogies in Chronicles, genealogies in Genesis, Matthew, Luke, I'm sorry. So you got genealogies that you can trace back, that people were able to trace back their genealogies to their respective tribe. So here's my thing. First, are they legitimate? I don't know. I have no reason to not believe, but I can certainly ask, are they? Because if you're saying that in 1947, this was God gathering the people back in the land, but notice what didn't happen. There's a lot that didn't happen that you're calling God a move of God in this respect to gather his elect Israel back into the land. Secondly, did they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord? And notice we just read here that when they come back to the land, they would do what? They would follow God's practices. They would follow God's precepts, his commandments. Did they do that? Are they doing that? The nation of Israel is a very secular nation today. In terms of national, Israel is a very secular nation. They are not following the laws of God. Sure, there are Orthodox Jews, there are Messianic Jews, but by and large, Israel is a secular nation. They're just as liberal in some respects to the United States, if not more. Okay? So in other words, is the nation itself, are they following God? So, let's go back. So when he says here, now learn this parable of the fig tree. Secondly, there may be examples of where Israel is called a fig tree, but Israel itself, there are many parables you could say where, or illustrations. For example, Israel is called an olive tree, not just a fig tree. And I would say, I don't even know if I could find a place where Israel itself is referred to as a fig tree. And if it does, I'm trying to think if I remember where there are examples of Israel being compared to or called a fig tree. What I want to say is this statement is not specifically identifying Israel as a fig tree, but as an indicator. Here's how you can tell, right? Now learn the parable of the fig tree. This is how you can tell the sign or the season of the coming of the Lord. That's all this is saying right here. So he says, now learn the parable of the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprout its leaves, you know that summer is near. See, that's the illustration. The illustration simply is you can tell the times by the signs. Then he says, in the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. Well, what things is he referring to? When you see the abomination that causes desolation, when you see the destruction of Jerusalem, that's what he's referring to. That's the signs. And then he says, I assure you, this generation would certainly not pass until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Now here's the thing, though. If Jesus was referring to, if 1947 was a sign, we have well past a generation. In fact, I think this might be we're going into the third generation from when Israel became a nation in 1947. Secondly, what signs then would even lead us to conclude that in 1947, what happened was God gathering his people back to Israel. So in other words, he says now, when you see the things, the abomination that makes desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, Israel fleeing to the mountains, that's a sign that the time is near. Just like when we see a fig tree or any tree, when the leaves start to bud, we know summer is near. So again, the fig tree was an illustration of the Israel itself. That when we, and by the way, and it certainly didn't mean that when we see Israel bud as a nation, that we know that this is a sign. All right. I think I'll pick it up next time. And I want to go back because there's some things I want to continue to kind of talk about the second coming itself. What is the second coming of Jesus Christ? The second coming itself, because there's some things that Jesus is going to do when we talk about the second coming. Okay. All right, guys. I'll pick this up in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.